My dad chose my cousin over me, funded his future, and ruined mine, but karma left him drowning in regret as I built my own life. I never imagined that I would be sharing this story, but here I am. I'm a 28-year-old man who has had a rather difficult life, particularly when it comes to family. My mother passed away while giving birth to me, which, I suppose, set the tone for the relationship I had with my father. He never really moved past her death and always treated me as if I were the reason she was gone. Naturally, I have no memories of my mother, but I've heard many stories from relatives about how thrilled she was to have me. She had always longed to become a mother and had faced years of fertility struggles before finally conceiving me. This knowledge only makes the whole situation more heartbreaking. She finally achieved her dream, only to have it tragically cut short. As I was growing up, our home was filled with photographs of my mother. My father kept everything just as she had left it, almost as if the house were a shrine to her memory. Her clothes remained hanging in the closet, and her books still lined the shelves. It felt as though I was living with the ghost of a woman I would never have the chance to know. Sometimes, I would sneak into their room just to touch her belongings, trying desperately to forge some sort of connection with the mother I never met. My relationship with my father, however, was entirely different. He was there in the physical sense, but emotionally, he might as well have been on a different planet. He went through the basic motions of parenting, ensuring that I was fed, clothed, and made it to school on time, but there was never any warmth or affection. No hugs, no words of love, not even a simple pat on the back for a job well done. I always felt like an outsider within my own home. Most days my father would barely even look at me, let alone engage in conversation. When he did speak to me, it was usually to criticize or compare me to my cousin Jake. Jake's father, my uncle, died in a car accident when Jake was 7, so my father kinda took him under his wing. I still remember the day we received the news about my uncle's death. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on homework, when the phone rang. My father answered, and I watched as his face crumpled while he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. That was the first and only time I ever saw my father cry. After hanging up the phone, he sat down heavily at the table and stared off into space for what felt like hours. Jake began to spend a lot more time at our house after that. I was excited at first. I thought that having another kid around might make things more fun and might even help my dad open up a bit. But it didn't take me long to understand that Jake's presence made my relationship with my dad even worse. He often asked, "Why can't you be more like Jake?" Or Jake would never do that. It seemed like Jake was the son he had always wanted and I was just there. Jake was sporty, friendly, and charming, which I wasn't. Jake was the life of the party, while I was shy and liked to read. It was delicious for my dad. I worked really hard to make my dad happy. It never seemed like enough. I tried to learn about his interests, got good grades, and joined every sports team. My dad thought Jake could never do a bad thing. He would compliment Jake on the smallest things, but I never got any credit for my own accomplishments. I won a science fair at school when I was about 12 years old. My project was a complicated model of the solar system that could move. I worked on it for weeks. I could hardly wait to tell my dad. I thought this would finally make him happy. His laughter and talk with Jake about a football game made me laugh when I got home. I told him I won, but he just nodded and went back to talking to Jake. It felt like I wasn't there at all. It gets worse as we age because of the bias. People always made fun of Jake and me because we were in the same grade. I did better in school than Jake did in high school, but my dad would always find ways to downplay my achievements. "Well, Jake's got more important things to think about than just grades," he would say. During one parent-teacher meeting, my English teacher raved about an essay I'd written. She told my dad it was one of the best papers she had ever seen from a kid my age and that she thought I would make a great writer. My dad just grunted and asked if this would help me get a big grant for sports. The teacher looked confused, and I was so embarrassed that my face burned. In spite of this, there remained a part of me that still yearned for changes. I reasoned that perhaps everything would be fine if only I could locate the appropriate thing, the magic key unlocking my dad's adoration. I pursued that unattainable dream all of my childhood and during my teenage years. When it came time for college, the true kickback was I had pushed my ass, enrolled at a decent university, and been ready to launch my future. Though I knew money would be limited, I reasoned my dad would contribute at least somewhat. Boy, I guess I was mistaken. The day I overheard my dad on the phone with Jake informing him he would pay for his whole college tuition will always be with me. My pulse dropped. My dad looked at me like I was insane when I asked if he could also assist me out. "Jake needs it more than I can afford to pay for both of you," he remarked. That's exactly how my college dreams vanished. I attempted to make it work nevertheless. Working evenings and weekends, I had a part-time job at a nearby diner. I applied for every scholarship I could locate, but it was not enough. The strain was intolerable. I was juggling my classes, working enough hours to pay for things, and still finding time to study and sleep. There has to be a give. After the first semester, I found myself having to drop out. On my own, I couldn't afford it. The part-time work I could find hardly covered tuition. Jake was living it at a famous university, completely on my dad's money, meanwhile. He would share images of his elegant dorm room, his spring break travels, the new laptop my dad had purchased for him for college on social media. Every post was like a knife turning in my gut. That moment was the breaking point for me. I gathered my belongings and left home, cutting off all contact with both my father and Jake. It was incredibly painful, but I knew I had to escape that toxic environment. I could no longer bear to live in the shadow of my deceased mother and the cousin who had somehow replaced me in my father's heart. The past few years have been challenging, to say the least. I've taken on various odd jobs, doing whatever I could to make ends meet. I've waited tables, worked in construction, pulled night shifts at gas stations, anything to ensure I had a roof over my head and food to eat. It has been difficult, especially when I see updates from Jake on social media about his incredible college experiences and the great job he secured after graduation. But despite everything, I'm gradually building a life for myself on my own terms. I now have a decent job, not something extravagant, but it covers the bills. I'm working as a manager at a local bookstore. It's not the career I envisioned, but I find solace in being surrounded by books all day. In addition, I'm taking night classes at the community college, working toward the degree I've always wanted. It's not an easy journey, but at least I'm making it on my own. Along the way, I've made some great friends, people who accept me for who I am, not for who they want me to be. They have become the family I never truly had. We have weekly game nights, go on camping trips when we can afford it, and support each other through thick and thin. It's far from perfect, but it's mine, and that makes all the difference. I thought I had left all that family drama behind me, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Yesterday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I was stunned to hear my dad's voice on the other end. It had been 3 years since we last spoke, and now he was reaching out for help. I'm not entirely sure how to feel about this, but one thing is certain, I am no longer that kid desperate for his approval. Update 1. It's been a week since my dad's unexpected call, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Speaking with him on the phone brought back a plethora of memories, the majority of which were not good. But his voice was different. Older. More worn out. More desperate. He began with small talk, asking how I was doing. It felt awkward and forced, as if he was trying to pretend the last few years hadn't happened. Then he got to the real reason for his call. He needed money, and a lot of it. At first, I was too shocked to respond. This was the man who had never given me a dime for college, who had chosen my cousin over me time and time again, and now he was asking me for financial help. The irony was not lost on me. When I finally found my voice, I asked him why he was coming to me. What about Jake, his golden boy? Shouldn't he be the one to help out? My dad fell silent for a moment, then mumbled something about Jake being busy with his new job and not having the means to help right now. I couldn't help but laugh. After years of being told how much better Jake was, how he deserved the opportunities I didn't, now I was supposed to be the one to step up. I made it clear to my dad exactly what I thought about that idea. I suggested he go talk to Jake instead, since he had always been the favorite anyway. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad started to say something about how he regretted some of the choices he'd made, how he wanted to make things right. But I cut him off. I told him it was too little, too late. I'd spent years trying to earn his love and approval, and now that he needed something from me, he was ready to play the remorseful father. I ended the call shortly after that. I experienced a range of feelings as soon as I hung up. I turned him away, and part of me felt bad about it since he was still my father. But a bigger part of me felt relieved. For the first time, I had stood up for myself against him. I didn't cave into the need for his approval that had driven me for so long. The next few days were tough. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I had done the right thing. I thought about all the times I needed aid and he wasn't there. Sure, it was the college tuition, but it was also the little moments when a child needed their father. School activities, girl advice, and learning to drive. He had been missing throughout. I remembered my first heartbreak when I was 16. Her name was Sarah, and I thought she was the one. We had been dating for 6 months when she broke up with me for one of the football players. I was devastated. I came home that day, eyes red from crying, and my dad was in his usual spot on the couch, watching TV. He barely looked up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment, hoping he would ask what was wrong, but he just grunted and told me I was blocking the screen. I went to my room and cried myself to sleep that night. Or the time I got my driver's license. Most of my friends' dads had taught them how to drive, but not mine. I had to beg my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, to teach me. When I finally passed the test, I came home excited to share the news. My dad was in the garage, working on his car with Jake. I showed them my new license. Jake congratulated me, but my dad just nodded and went back to explaining something about the engine to Jake. I don't think he ever let me drive his car. Another thing that made me think was what kind of trouble he was in to need my money. My dad was always very proud, almost too much. It has to be important for him to reach out in this way. Even with everything, I was still a little worried about him. But then I thought about all the times I had been worried about my own future because I wasn't making enough money since I had to quit college. What did he care about then? I had to work things out by myself, which I did. I made my own life without his help. Why should I help him right now? I remembered the year I lived on my own after moving out. In order to start over, I moved to a new place where no one knew me. I got any job I could find and found a tiny studio room that I could barely afford. I cleaned during the day and worked as a bartender at night. I was always tired, but I was able to get through it on my own. When I got home from work at the bar some nights, my feet hurt and smelled like smoke and beer. I wondered if I had made a mistake. I could have put my pride aside, stayed home, and tried to work things out with my dad. But then I remembered being judged all the time and never feeling good enough, and I knew I had made the right choice. I started to feel better about my choice as the days went by. I understood that by not giving in to his request, I was finally giving him a handle on things. I wasn't the same kid he used to be able to ignore and push around. Today I'm an adult, I choose for myself, and I don't owe him anything. I couldn't help but be interested though. What had exactly caused this to happen? What happened that Jake, the perfect child, couldn't or wouldn't help? There were times when I wanted to find out more about what was going on with my dad and my cousin. But I hesitated. Did I really want to open that can of worms? Was it worth potentially stirring up all that old pain and resentment? I thought about getting in touch with Jake's mom, my aunt. Even though she was sometimes cold, she was always nice to me. She might understand what's going on. The last time I saw her, though, was at a family get-together right before I left for work. She gave Jake a big hug and told him she was proud of him for getting into such a good college. She only gave me a weak smile and a pat on the shoulder when it was my turn to leave. I made up my mind not to call her. I'm still not sure what to do next as I write this report. A part of me wants to forget about the past and keep focused on my own growth in life. On the other hand, I can't help but wonder what's going on between my dad and Jake. Now that I think about it, only time will tell if I'd decide to look into it more or not. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. Despite my initial hesitation, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some digging to find out why my dad suddenly needed help and why Jake wasn't stepping up. I started by reaching out to a few family friends who were still in touch with my dad. At first, they were reluctant to share much, but eventually, I pieced together a pretty clear picture of what had been going on. I called Mrs. Peterson first. She had been my mom's best friend and had always been kind to me growing up. She seemed surprised to hear from me but was happy to chat. After some small talk, I steered the conversation toward my dad and Jake. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then sighed deeply before starting to fill me in. It turns out that my dad had gone all in on supporting Jake, far beyond just paying for his college tuition. He had helped Jake with the down payment on a house, bought him a car, and even invested in a business venture Jake wanted to pursue. To do all this, my dad had taken out loans and maxed out his credit cards. He was drowning in debt, all for the sake of giving Jake the life he thought he deserved. Mrs. Peterson told me about a conversation she had with my dad a few years back. He had been bragging about Jake's successes, talking about how he was going to be a big-shot businessman one day. When she asked about me, my dad had just shrugged and said he hoped I was doing okay. The indifference in his voice had shocked her. Next, I reached out to my old neighbor, Mr. Johnson, the one who taught me how to drive. He had always been observant and filled me in on some of the more recent developments. Apparently, Jake had convinced my dad to invest in a startup he was launching with some college friends. It was some kind of tech company, but Mr. Johnson wasn't clear on the details. What he did know was that my dad had remortgaged the house to get the money for the investment. The kicker? Jake's new job, the one my dad had proudly boasted about, wasn't going as well as expected. The business venture had flopped, And Jake was now struggling to make ends meet himself. When my dad turned to him for help with the mounting debt, Jake apparently told him he couldn't spare anything right now. Mr. Johnson had overheard an argument between my dad and Jake just a few weeks ago. Jake had come over, driving a flashy new car, and my dad confronted him about the failed business and the money he'd invested. Jake had yelled something about how it wasn't his fault the market had changed and that he'd pay my dad back when he could. Then he peeled out of the driveway, leaving my dad standing there, looking utterly defeated. I have to admit, a part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. After years of being compared to Jake, constantly hearing how I didn't measure up, it turned out that the golden child wasn't so golden after all. My dad had placed all his hopes and resources into Jake, and now those hopes had crumbled. But mostly, I just felt tired of the endless drama, the lingering pain, and the constant what-ifs. I thought about how different things could have been if my dad had chosen to invest in me the way he did in Jake. Maybe I would have finished college, and perhaps I'd be in a completely different career today. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have learned the invaluable lessons I did about self-reliance and perseverance. I remembered the tough times after dropping out of college, how I juggled multiple jobs, often scraping by on ramen noodles and cheap coffee. I thought about the long nights I spent studying after exhausting shifts, driven by the determination to improve myself, even without the benefit of a formal education. It had been a hard journey, but it shaped me into the person I am today. I wasn't sure if I should tell my dad what I had learned. After some thought, I chose to text him. I told him I knew what was going on with Jake and the bill. I didn't offer to help, but I also didn't brag. What I really said was that I hoped he could see now that the decisions he made had effects on both of us. After a few hours, he answered. He said sorry and a lot of things in a long message. He told me that he knew he had been unfair to me and that his grief over my mom's death had made him lose his temper. He talked about how proud my mom would have been of the man I'd become, even though he wasn't a great dad. He asked if we could get together and talk. I thought about that message for a long time before I decided what to do. I still had a little boy inside me that wanted his dad's love, so there was a part of me that wanted to say yes. I imagined a time when we'd get together, talk things out, and our relationship would be fixed magically. But as an adult who has had to work hard for everything, I knew better. I reflected on all the important milestones in my life that my father had missed, like my high school graduation, where I scanned the audience, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face, only to feel the sting of disappointment. I thought about my first apartment, which I furnished with second-hand items and a lot of determination, and the promotion I recently received at the bookstore, a moment I had no one to share with except my friends. In the end, I decided to respond to my father, letting him know that I was not ready for a meeting. While I acknowledged his apology, I made it clear that words alone could not erase the years of neglect and favoritism I had endured. I expressed my need for time and space, and I told him that he needed to respect that boundary. I also made it abundantly clear that I would not be bailing him out financially. His decisions had brought him to this point, just as my decisions had led me to where I am now. It was not my responsibility to fix the mistakes he had made. As I sit here writing this update, I feel a sense of relief. Not happiness exactly, but as if a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. For so long I carried the burden of trying to earn my father's love, constantly questioning what was wrong with me that made him favor Jake. Now I realize it was never about me at all. It was about his own unresolved issues, his inability to cope with loss and grief. I am uncertain about what the future holds for my relationship with my father, or whether there will be any relationship at all. Perhaps one day, we will have a genuine conversation about everything that has transpired. Perhaps not. For now, I am focusing on my own life and personal growth. I am continuing with my night classes, diligently working toward that degree. I am also building relationships with people who appreciate me for who I am, not for who they want me to be. Just last week, I helped my friend Sarah, not Sarah from high school, move into her new apartment. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, it dawned on me that these connections, this chosen family, are what truly matter, not the approval of someone who was never able to recognize my worth. Life is not always easy, but I am forging my own path. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I am confident that I will face it on my own terms, with the strength I have developed through years of self-reliance. That is something my father's favoritism can never take away from me.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
My mom wants me to marry my creepy stepbrother and have his child. She now harasses me at work and lies about the inheritance. I, 29F, have an older stepbrother, Chris, 42M, who has been a nightmare since the day my mom married his dad. Let me give a bit of background. Our parents married when I was 4 and he was 17. Both our parents were widowed. After their wedding, we moved to the US since my mom had American citizenship through marriage. I was born in the US too, but after my dad died when I was 1, my mom and I moved back to Colombia. My stepdad got his residency through marriage, and my stepbrother, because he was a minor, wasn't a big fan of me. My only memories of him are just constant bullying. He would be left in charge of me since he was studying locally and lived with my parents. But mostly, his babysitting really meant things like locking me in the guest bathroom or the shed outside. He would steal my lunchbox whenever he was the one who dropped me off at school. He even began to harm my pets. I have an old cat that has been with me for almost 22 years. He tried more than once to run her over with his car. My parents never believed any of it. He's the classic golden child. My mom absolutely wanted a son instead of a daughter, so my stepbrother took priority over me. The bullying just kept getting worse and creepier. He had this long key for the bathroom. The door was designed so that if it got locked by accident, one could open it by inserting a long stick or key through a small hole on the outside. He would use it to walk in on me showering. My underwear would disappear sometimes, and I know for a fact it was him. He also started taking pictures of me sleeping. One night, I woke up to him taking care of himself next to me while I slept. I yelled, obviously. My parents came over, but he wasn't in trouble. I was, for tempting him. I was 14 when this happened. He was 27. No one helped me, and he got bolder until he did something I am still in therapy for. When I was 16, it got to a point where I called my biological half-brother, Sam, 48M, and son of my biological father's first wife, to see if I could live with him and his wife, Sandy, during my last 2 years of high school. When Sam found out what was going on, he confronted my mom. My mom didn't care and just told him to take me, as long as he never asked her for money. Done and done. My brother and his wife became my legal guardians and took me in with my cat and the old family dog since I didn't trust leaving any living creature with Chris around. My parents never checked on me. My extended family from my father's side knew what happened and immediately got together to ensure I could finish school well and go to college. I don't know my maternal family at all. Thanks to my paternal family, including Sam's mother and her family, I got my bachelor's and master's with no student debt and work as a nurse practitioner. I still live with Sam, his wife and their 2 kids, and I pay a small rent. Neither Sam nor his wife expected me to pay anything, but that's the least I can do for the 2 people who have taken care of me for 13 years. For anyone wondering why I didn't move, it's incredibly expensive where I live and Sam insisted I stay with them until I save enough to buy my own home. Things seemed okay until my mom messaged me recently. She had not messaged me since I was 18, when she told me she no longer had any responsibility for me. In this message, she sounded overly friendly, telling me how she missed me and asking how I was doing. I was a bit creeped out but decided to be nice, telling her about what I had done since leaving her care. She seemed very interested, as apparently, she knew I was a nurse but not what kind I was. She began asking me about my salary. I didn't tell her anything about it, except that it was enough to pay the bills. My mom then began texting about Chris and how he was barely making any money due to his student debt. Apparently, Chris never finished a degree, jumping from career to career. He is now working in my stepdad's used car business as a salesman, but most of his pay goes toward his substantial student debt accumulated over the years. I told my mom how sorry I was that Chris was having a hard time and wished him luck. That's when my mom finally got to what she wanted. She texted me that I needed to pay his student debt so he could finally begin to make the money he deserves, like the man of the family. I just turned off my phone. When I got home, Sam was surprised since I was usually the last to arrive. Sandy wasn't home yet. I told Sam what happened and showed him my mom's text messages. I don't think I've seen Sam this angry ever. He told me to block my mom, stepdad and Chris if I hadn't done so yet. After talking with Sam and Sandy, I called my boss to ask for the next day and the one after off. This gave me a 4-day weekend, including the days I'm normally off shift. My boss was more than okay with this and told me to just take it easy and let her know if she could help. This backfired because the next day, my mom and Chris decided to come to Sam's house to speak to me. I was alone since Sam and Sandy were at work and the kids were at school. I immediately called Sam and told him what was going on. He told me not to open the door and that he was on his way. My mom spent the whole time screaming that I owed them for raising me and that my sweet brother deserved the money. Chris was going around trying to find a window or door unlocked. There weren't any, since the windows have safety bars and the only other doors are in the closed garage and one in the yard. The yard door was locked, and just in case, I locked the one in the garage. I won't post what he called me when he saw me from one of the windows, but basically, he told me they should have thrown me away when I was a baby since I grew to be a burden. He pounded on one of the windows so hard that he cracked the glass. Eventually, he gave up and went back to the front door, clearly trying to kick it down. I didn't have anything to worry about. The door was a security door, but I was still very scared. Between yelling, threatening, pleading and insults, I finally heard Sam screaming at them to get lost. I only saw things from the window. Sam pretty much dragged them both off the porch. They got to a point I couldn't hear, but I saw my mom and Chris looking pale and scared before they ran to their car and drove off way past the legal speed limit. Sam came in a bit later and immediately went into full protective brother mode, asking me if I was okay. He kept saying sorry and hugging me. Sandy arrived almost immediately after and looked like she was about to commit a felony. Apparently, Sam threatened them with filing charges for what Chris did to me when I was 16. My brother's ace, my stepdad, was willing to testify against his own son. That seemed enough to get Chris off our backs, but not my mom. Since then, it's been 3 days, and my mom has sent texts, called non-stop from various numbers, and rallied a group of people who are supposedly my maternal family to harass me for money. She claims that the money should legally be hers since she's my mother, and that it's my late father's missed child support. Sam is helping me find a lawyer to get a restraining order on my mom, and I plan to take my stepdad's offer to testify by pressing charges against Chris. I can't say I can forgive him for not stopping his son, but I appreciate that he's at least trying. I don't know the details, but Chris did something to a relative of his dad, and since then, they had a really bad fallout. I took my boss's offer and will be on vacation for a few more days. But here it is. My vacation days are getting eaten up and my therapist might need a therapist after this. Thankfully, my dark sense of humor and supportive paternal family are keeping me somewhat sane. Update. I didn't think I would be making an update so soon, but my mother is unrelenting. To the people who were so kind and gave me advice earlier, thank you so much. It really helps to have people show kindness in difficult days. I followed the advice to freeze my credit and will be getting a new phone for personal use. I'll have to keep my old phone for work for a little while. Now, to update on the situation. We are going through with pressing charges and might pursue a civil lawsuit for 2 years of child support my mother owes. We are not sure yet of our chances, but my brother wants to go scorched earth. As for my mother, she began a new campaign. She's been posting false accusations about me, accusing my stepbrother Chris of sexual assault. She's also been accusing me of being a temptress who tried for years to sleep with my brother. She even got a few relatives, who I just found out are my aunts, to join in, claiming they were witnesses. I have never met these women in my life. My stepfather actually commented on her post, saying my mom was lying and accusing his own son of being a pedophile. That's how I found out about the big fallout between them. My stepbrother apparently went after one of my stepfather's nieces. I don't know the girl's age, but she has to be about my age if I'm thinking of the right person. If not, she's younger than me. A lot of my biological father's relatives have also taken to social media to call out my mother, saying she had always claimed she was an orphan and had no family, while now she suddenly has 3 sisters. It's a mess. I'm just watching for now and being a stay-at-home aunt. My nephews love it since we go out for crazy shenanigans after they finish their homework. My boss has helped me with some paperwork for a leave of absence and I should be off for about 6 weeks. After that, I'll be mostly working from home for a few weeks. It's not the greatest update, and to be sincere, things are not fun, but it's nice to spend time with the kiddos at least. Also, I forgot to mention this. No, my mom is not likely sleeping with or in a relationship with my stepbrother, as some people had mentioned. My mom always wanted a son, and I was a disappointment because I was born a girl. She treats my brother like he's her real son, and I think she truly loves him as a mother. She made sure to tell me how disappointing it was for her when I was born. Update 2. I hope the title is okay for the rules. I was recommended to post here but wasn't sure where to start. My mother was widowed when I was 1 year old. My biological father was much older than her, she was his second wife, with a 20+ year age difference. After that, she remarried her hometown sweetheart and adopted his 17-year-old son. My dad was American, and my mom is Colombian. I was born in the US, then we moved back to Colombia for a few years, and we returned to the US when I was 4. My whole life, my mother constantly complained about the fact that I was a girl. She would say things like, "If you were a boy, maybe we could have gotten more from your father." Or "Girls are so useless." All I was to her was the problem child. She took my inheritance and squandered it, mostly on things for my stepbrother. Whenever she had guests, she would always introduce me and joke about how I ruined her body and wasn't even worth it since I was a girl. Most of her friends thought I had some kind of mental illness because of her lies about me being mentally behind. She used the R word, and would often blame it on my gender, saying that because I was born a girl, I was clearly inferior. During holidays, I would be left behind with a sitter. I was just too much of a problem child and would ruin things for my sweet brother. We only have one family picture from when I was 5. If I got anything nice with my own money, my mother would take it from me. If it was something like makeup or clothes, she would say I wasn't attractive enough or worthy enough to have such nice things. I should just stick with a plain face since it would make it easier for me to find a job when I was done with high school. She had no intentions of letting me go to college. But the worst part is, she never protected me. My stepbrother is a predator. At first, he just bullied me, stealing my food and locking me in dark places. When I hit puberty though, he began to do worse things. Walking in on me when I showered, even if I locked the door. Stealing my underwear, watching me sleep. And he even sexually assaulted me when I was 16 and he was 29. My mother blamed it on me, saying I was tempting her poor sweet boy. I was saved by my biological half-brother and his wife. They took me in at 16, finished raising me, and put me through college with the help of my paternal family. Even my father's first wife pitched in and has always been kind to me. She's more of a mother to me than my own mother ever was. Now, I'm 29 years old, have a good career as a nurse practitioner, and I'm saving to buy my own home. My mother found out about this and has been demanding that I give her my money because she is my mother, and my money should be hers. She also demands that I pay off my abusive stepbrother's student loans. Since I refuse to comply with my dear mother's demands, she has now gone online to post that I'm a temptress trying to ruin her son's life and that I refuse to pay her back for all the care and love she supposedly gave me over the years. She even had some women, who are supposedly my aunts, join her in this. I've never met any of my maternal family. As far as I knew, my mother was an orphan. Now, I suddenly have 3 aunts who claim to have seen how bad a person I am. Update 3. This might be my last update about my mother and stepbrother since we're finally starting the legal fights, but I finally had a good laugh. In my previous posts, I haven't said much about my biological father. He died when I was 1 year old, so I never really met him. I have one picture of him holding me when I was an infant. I mostly know him from stories from his family. What I do know is that he was a man of means. He had a lot of assets that he carefully divided in his will, not so rich I'll never have to work rich, but just rich enough that I would be able to live comfortably as long as I worked and managed my finances well. I was not aware that he had made sure to leave me anything, and neither was my half-brother Sam, his son with his first wife. I'm the daughter of an affair partner turned second wife. My understanding was that anything I inherited was wasted by my mother to buy things for her predator stepson Chris, whom she prefers over me. He was my abuser growing up. In her words, daughters don't need inheritance, just marry a wealthy old man like me. Well, since my mother and Chris have been harassing me lately, we drove to my dad's lawyer to get some things we need from my dad's records for the lawsuit we are planning. He's a sweet older man who kind of looks like my dad a bit and was my dad's best friend. When we met, he received me with a hug and told me how happy he was to finally meet me. His wife was there too, and she also gave me a big hug and told me we needed to have dinner at their place. Once we all caught up, we discovered my mother had been faking receipts to get money from my trust. A lot of it, some of which was from when I was under Sam's guardianship. She's not the executor of my trust and had to provide receipts for anything. She's been sending receipts claiming they're for me because I'm still in medical school, even though I finished school in 2021. Well, her meal ticket not only got torn, but now she's in big trouble because this is fraud, and basically, my hands are tied about pressing charges. She claims me as a dependent on her taxes so my dad's lawyer would refund her for her expenses. He basically told me there's just no way we can keep this in civil court. He had to contact the IRS and the police. It doesn't help that she's been using my social security number for some things she shouldn't. Thank you to the people who advised me to freeze my credit. You guys saved me for sure. I probably won't be able to post for quite a while since I'm going to be incredibly busy. I'm just mentally exhausted from how much has happened. I wouldn't have done anything about my mom using my trust if she had left me alone. I wouldn't even know about it because the trust is set for me to take over with proof of marriage or graduation from college. Since I didn't know about it, I never sent the required paperwork to take control. She could have milked it dry if she left me alone and just kept sending fake information. I'm in the process of getting what's left of my trust. There's quite a bit in it and it should be enough for me to get a house or condo if I mix it with my savings and still have some left over to invest or do other things safely. I might wait for a while to buy anything though, I don't know how safe it would be since my mom still has my social security number. Update 4. Hey Reddit, this is more of a personal rant than a full-on update. Things are only starting on the legal side of things, so no real update or information I'm allowed to share. This is more on the personal side of things since I just came home from having my mother harass me in a bar. It was not fun. Short background. My mother is a greedy liar who let her stepson Chris, who's 13 years older than me, abuse me since I was a small child. First, it was physical abuse, then sexual abuse started when I was 14 until I was 16. Now she wants me to clear a student debt, and she has been mooching off my biological father's inheritance. As for last night, well, I decided to go out with some girlfriends for a girls' night. My half-brother Sam and his wife Sandy have been pushing me to go out for a while. We went to a local bar. I mostly stuck to the stools by the bar as I'm a massive introvert, but I like seeing my friends having fun. So I was simply drinking and talking to the bartender in passing. Well, my good mood was ruined when I noticed my mother, thankfully alone, walk towards me. The moment she saw me, she pretty much launched herself to hug me and began crying, saying how much she had missed me and how different I looked. I was trying really hard to get away from her, but she began causing a scene. She started begging for us to reconcile, saying that she was sorry I took my stepbrother's affection the wrong way, that they both love me and want me to live with them. She was loud, and people were looking at me. Some even looked sorry for her, and I had people encouraging me to hug my mom back. It was embarrassing and just so wrong. I just exploded and told her to leave me alone and walked out. That was even worse because she kept following me, with 2 or 3 randoms calling me a terrible daughter. She just kept swearing that Chris truly cares for me and wants us to be a family again. She even said that he found me so beautiful that he couldn't help himself when he sexually assaulted me. She said, when he made love to you. As if it was something consensual. I was a minor when he attacked me. He was almost 30. I just started crying and screaming at her to go away and leave me alone. Thankfully, one of my more sober friends called Sam, and he came over very fast. He scared away my mom and took me home. I'm now 100% sure I don't want to go out again. For people wondering why I never called the cops, I called the cops since I was 11 to report the abuse. I reported at 16 what he did to me. They took his side. I don't trust them. I truly believe cops don't care about sexual assault victims. I'm just writing this to get it out of my system. My therapist is unavailable, so Reddit is the next best thing. Update 5. Hey, been a bit sorry for the radio silence. I had some people asking for updates, but things had been pretty quiet until this weekend, so I had nothing to post. I know people usually do a recap app or something like that, so TLDR. My mother has always preferred my stepbrother Chris, who is 42. He was my abuser growing up. The abuse went from the time I was 11 to 16, when I moved in with my half-brother after the worst attack. I was recently tracked down by my mother, and she along with my stepbrother have been harassing me since. Currently, I'm in a legal fight against them to recover some stolen inheritance from my father and to resolve other matters. This weekend, once again, my mother decided to accost me at work. I was working from home, doing clerical work for the clinic I work at. I'm a nurse practitioner but took some clerical duties to be able to work from home when the mess with my mother and Chris began. Since then, the time I could work from home has ended, so I'm back in the clinic taking patients. For the most part, Saturday went well and quiet. Sunday, however, I noticed someone that shared my mother's name but not her last name. My mom has a very unique name, very old sounding, and I've seen it only twice in my whole life. Of course, there's a big Latino community where I live, so I just assumed this was another person. We're from a Colombian family, though I was born in the US to an American father. Lo and behold, it was my mother using a fake last name. When I saw her, I immediately called my boss. She's aware of the situation and immediately went to ask my mother to please leave the premises. This can be a controversial move, so to explain it before the debate starts. She was in for a general checkup, not a life or death treatment. She was not denied because of protected reasons, but because I, as a member of staff, felt my life was in danger in her presence. There are a lot of other clinics with varying prices, and they are open to new patients, so she can get her checkup anywhere else. This is allowed under our state's law. If she was hyperventilating or clearly in distress, we would not have been able to ask her to leave. My mother, of course, went on a rampage demanding to be seen by me specifically. My boss, thankfully, was not intimidated and just insisted my mother had to leave or else the cops would be called. After a back and forth that I was watching from the security cameras, this all happened in our waiting room. My mother threw a letter at my boss and left fuming. She even pushed a lady that was walking in, though thankfully no one was hurt. My boss brought me the letter and told me she will make sure not to assign me any patients with my mother's first name and went to make arrangements with our front desk. I took a break and decided to read the letter, mostly to see if it was something I could use for my legal case. This is a translation to my best capabilities. My lovely daughter, it hurts me so much that you refuse to speak to me. I love you so much, and all I want is to recover the years we've lost. I only have you left from your father, whom I love dearly. I know there are a lot of misunderstandings with Chris. He loves you so much too, and I wish you would give him a chance to prove it to you. He always talked about how beautiful you are and how much he wished you two could spend more time together. He truly adores you, and I wish you would consider his feelings more. He even asked me to convince you to marry him, and I think it's a wonderful idea. Papa, your stepfather, and I are probably divorcing, and this will be the perfect solution so Chris, you and I can stay a family. He keeps going on and on about how much he wants to raise your and his baby together. Let me know when you want to go shopping for wedding dresses. I love you, my darling. Mom, I'm going to share a few personal notes here. I am unable to get pregnant. After Chris's attack, I had some medical complications that have left me unable to conceive. My mother knows about it. Chris knows about it. The cops know about it. They ruled the whole thing as consensual sex, and because I was 16, the legal age of consent, nothing was done. I showed this to my lawyer, and he added it to the compilation of things we're using for the legal case. Still no court date, and the cops don't consider my case risky enough to do the paperwork for a restraining order. I do have one officer who is taking this very seriously and has been amazing. It's just the majority who don't seem to care or have too much on their docket to give my case time. Update. I'm going to update here since it's only been 3 days and it feels dumb to make a new post. Chris has been arrested. Apparently, he kidnapped a 2-year-old baby girl, his cousin's daughter, no less. The baby was recovered safe and unharmed from what I heard. I'm glad she wasn't taken for long. Who knows what the hell he wanted to do to her. If I hear more details, I'll update.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.
My entitled sister abandoned her 3 children, so I raised them. Years later, they offer me money as a thank you, but she demands it. Hello, I am 48F, and my younger sister, Diana, is 46F. Diana and I never got along well as youngsters. She was always snobbish and unpleasant to me, so we split up as soon as we graduated high school. I elected to continue my education, whilst she preferred to live with her boyfriend at the moment. It was lucky that her lover was wealthy, as our parents could never have afforded the rent for her to live alone. However, she made it abundantly obvious to our parents that she was unconcerned about their opinions on her life and would do whatever she wanted. So my parents never tried to stop her and instead let her go free. Diana had twin girls at 20 and a boy at 21 while living with her lover. My parents were pleased for her, but also anxious because she now had many responsibilities and no work. She was wholly dependent on her boyfriend's money to support her lifestyle. Diana never married her partner, which I believe was a mistake because she would have been entitled to alimony if they split up. They had to part ways after Diana discovered that he had been cheating on her. Thankfully, he provided the child support she was entitled to, but he chose not to be a father and signed away his parental rights. The girls were 3 years old at the time, but my nephew was only 2. After that, my sister was fully on her own and required all of the assistance she could get to maintain herself. Despite our sour relationship, I chose to assist her, primarily owing to pressure from our parents. At the time, I made a respectable living, but it wasn't enough to sustain all 4 of them. However, my parents and I gave a tiny bit of money each month, and they were able to make ends meet. She struggled for the first several months because she lacked a degree and work experience. She had to start at the bottom and work her way up, which forced her to dedicate a significant amount of time to her employment in order to grow rapidly. But this was difficult because she also had to consider her children, and she couldn't simply leave them at home. Hiring a babysitter was a possibility, but it was prohibitively expensive, so she was forced to rely on me or her friends. Our parents were also working and contributing financially to aid her, so they were unable to stay at home with the children. I was in the same predicament. She didn't have any friends who would take on the duty of minding her children while she worked because they all had their own lives and occupations. As a result, she was limited to minimum wage positions that allowed her to work flexible hours and return home quickly. This allowed her to avoid paying the babysitter to stay with her children for an extended period of time, which would have been prohibitively expensive. This condition persisted for a few years, and I believe Diana began to despise her own children because she saw them as hurdles to her success. She said that they were the only things preventing her from moving forward. I would pay her a visit on occasion, not for her sake, but for the sake of the children, to make sure they were doing well. I didn't have a nice connection with her, but I wasn't ruthless enough to let innocent children suffer because of their mother's poor decisions. So my parents and I would check on the kids on a regular basis. They were always complaining about Diana's mistreatment of them. She would chastise them for minor infractions and strike out at them simply for being children and trying to have fun. It was a dreadful existence for all of them, and I hoped I could help them by removing them from that place and keeping them with me, but I couldn't because she was the rightful parent and I had no legal authority over them. Furthermore, she received child support from her ex and was doing her best to make ends meet. I felt awful for her, but even worse for the kids. Diana started seeing other men, which made things considerably worse. Every time a relationship failed, she blamed her children. She was convinced that once her partners discovered she was a mother of 3, they would abandon their relationship with her. I believe it was because she never mentioned her children during the early stages of dating, only bringing it up after a month or two, which appeared dishonest. I tried several times to explain this to her, but she was convinced that she was being rejected because she had children. She kept teasing them about it, reminding them of how their father had abandoned her and threatening to leave them as well if they didn't behave. The children were scared of her, and their childhood was defined by their mother's narcissism. This continued for years. Several times, I considered taking the kids and fleeing with them, but I couldn't. I could not petition for custody or denounce her because, while her actions were wrong, they did not justify taking the children away from her. So the scenario remained, and the kids were simply grateful to have me in their life. My parents were too elderly to be their pals, but I was always there for them when they needed it. They could never tell their mother about their issues, but they could always go to their aunt, which they did. Whenever they had problems with school, academics, or even Diana, they would come to me, and I appreciated their trust. It's no surprise that when they turned 18, they decided to leave their mother's house and move in with me instead. Now that they were no longer children, they could select where and with whom to live, and they chose me. Diana was clearly dissatisfied and had a lot to say. She stated she had squandered 18 years of her life raising these children, only for them to abandon her in the end. She was really unpleasant about it, telling me that if I had wanted to raise her children so badly, I should have stepped in sooner rather than taking over after the work was basically done. I wanted to tell her that she hadn't actually raised them. They had basically raised themselves because she was usually at work or out on dates with guys who eventually dumped her after discovering she had 3 children. She had no idea what her priorities should be, and it was clear why things turned out as they did. The children selected the person who had genuinely been there for them over the person who had always tortured and reprimanded them since she couldn't find anyone and was miserable in her life. It was evident that she had no idea she was harming them because she was suffering herself. However, I did not want to rub it in her face because I knew it must have been unpleasant for her, which is why she was lashing out at me. So I kept my mouth shut and that was it. After that, we didn't really communicate. Her children opted to leave her and live with me. Diana also chose to cut ties with all of us and cease speaking to anyone, including our parents. This was weird because they had done nothing to deserve it. I believe the fact that they hadn't chosen her side against me when my nieces and nephew opted to live with me irritated her, so she cut them off as well. It's been 7 years, and they're all doing well now. I don't know what Diana has been up to, but I know her children are doing well. My nephew attended medical school and is now a pediatrician. One of my nieces has a degree in literature and is now a teacher, and her twin sister has a hair shop. I assisted all of them in obtaining business loans and financed them to the best of my ability. I'm very proud of them because they've gone a long way from their previous home. They are now living apart. They only stayed with me for 4 years, and even then, it wasn't really like they were living with me because they were generally away at college and only came back on occasion. I believe they didn't want to return to Diana's home, where they didn't feel wanted. It's been 2 years since they all moved out, and I'm very thrilled for them. I never expected anything in return for what I did because I truly believed it was the right thing to do. They were just kids, and no matter how bad things were between me and my sister, I could never be callous to them. I've always had a soft spot for them, especially since I've never had kids or married. It wasn't my cup of tea, but for them, I wanted to be there as a parental figure because their father wasn't around, and, well, we all know who Diana was. They needed someone, and my parents were too old for the position, so I stepped forward. That is all I did. I never anticipated anything in return, but I am grateful that they are the type of children who think I deserve a gift of appreciation for what I done. Even though I don't believe it was something that required compensation, I appreciated their gesture. About a week ago, I celebrated my 48th birthday with my friends and family, including my nieces and nephew. I had a great time, and my nephew was kind enough to organize everything for me. Despite my desire to pay for everything, he insisted on covering the costs because he is now earning enough money to do things for me and display his appreciation. After the party, the three of them sat me down to talk. They told me that now that they were all financially established, they wanted to express their gratitude by collectively writing me a check. I tried to explain that it was unnecessary because I was still working and could support myself, but they insisted. They claimed it wasn't about repaying a debt. They could never repay me for what I had done for them since it wasn't about money. It was about the encouragement and faith I had provided them, which they could never fully repay. This was their humble attempt to show their appreciation. I was deeply moved by their genuine act and wanted to share it on social media. I just wanted to thank them for everything they were doing for me. My sister and I hadn't spoken in years, so I didn't think she would care. I was blocked on every platform, and I assumed she wouldn't see it, so I felt it was fine. Diana had never followed up with us or inquired about her children's well-being after they had left home. Granted, it was they who broke up with her first and moved in with me, but that was her fault. The least she could have done was show interest in their lives and try to be a mother figure to them in order to make one for her faults. But, to be honest, she didn't seem to care about the loss of communication, so I figured she was all right. Anyway, following that post, I received a reply from her a few days ago. I wasn't expecting it because, as I indicated, we hadn't spoken in 6 years. However, I should have predicted that as soon as she realized her children were financially secure, she would start sniffing around like a bloodhound, trying to figure out how much money she could obtain from them. In her reply, she stated that she had seen my post and wanted to talk about her children. She recognized that she had made mistakes in the past and had not been a good mother to kids, but she felt compelled to give herself another shot. She claimed she had missed them a lot over the previous 6 years. I'm not sure how much truth there is in that statement because if she truly missed them, she could have contacted me at least once. She asked me to speak with her children and help bridge the gap between them, as they respond well to me. The timing was strange, so I ignored her message. However, when I failed to react, she called me in the evening, and I snapped. She insisted that I assist her in reconnecting with her children, but I refused. I was quite aware that she was merely pursuing their money, not because she truly cared about their well-being. If she truly regretted what she had done, she would have contacted them directly rather than talking to me. She couldn't let go of her pride and ego for a single second. She still expected her children to contact her, despite the fact that she was the one who had made a mistake. It was amazing how entitled she was. She tried to dispute with me, arguing that she wasn't pursuing their money and that it was offensive for me to suggest so. I assured her that I was not implying anything. It was so obvious. I felt appalled and repulsed by what she was doing. She then accused me of stealing everything from her, claiming that I had already stolen her children and was now stealing her riches. I informed her that I didn't need the money and was originally hesitant to accept the check, but now I was going to take it all because she didn't deserve it. Now she's crying on social media, telling everyone what I said and attempting to make me seem bad. Some of my relatives say I went too far with what I said, that I'm greedy, and that I owe her an apology, which is absurd. That is why I am here to inquire if I'm in the wrong for telling my sister that she does not deserve the money that her children have decided to give me. Update. As some responses advised, I recounted the situation with my nephews and nieces. They informed me they had heard about it from a few of relatives and had considered speaking with me but had not had the time. However, after I called them over and discussed it with them, they informed me that they believed I did the correct thing. My nephew was open about his views, stating that he had never considered of his mother as a maternal figure throughout his life. He always blamed me because she had never been there for him, and my niece agreed. He'd always been the most outspoken of the group, so it was predictable that this was all coming from him. My nieces were too emotional to speak, but he was quite angry and upset. He explained that Diana only spoke to me since she had never done the basic minimum for them. This was despite the fact that she was receiving child support from their father, and even then, she would humiliate them and make them feel horrible for merely existing, which was not their fault. They believe I did the right thing and have informed me that they will not contact their mother, regardless of what happens. They also believe that I should stand up for myself and explain my side of the story online now that Diana has decided to speak negatively about me on social media. They believe that this is the most effective approach to convey the message, therefore that's what I'll do. I'm delighted they opted to take my side in this because my parents are staying out of it and have stated that they don't want to get involved. Diana never spoke to them after her children cut her off, which I find unusual. My parents' polite approach to this problem strikes me as unusual, given that they have not communicated with Diana in the last 6 years. I was disappointed, but at least my nieces and nephew support me. Now many people have asked me why I did not petition for custody and have the children taken away from Diana if I knew she was a bad mother and was mistreating them. I mentioned in my piece that, while her actions were wrong, they did not constitute torture, abuse or neglect. She was constantly harsh to them and wasn't emotionally present for her children. So while I could have filed for custody, it was quite improbable that I would have gotten the children into my care. Courts typically encourage families to keep together, and in this case, they had already lost their father. Their father had abandoned them, leaving them with only their mother as a biological parent. Naturally, the court would want the family to stay together. I knew that if I filed a petition against her or took legal action against Diana, she would ensure that I never saw them again. She would make certain that she took the kids far away from me. It was already improbable that I would have been able to take kids away from her and obtain full custody, so this would have put them in a dangerous situation. This is why I decided to play it safe by staying in touch with them and being available for them at all times. I'm not sure if it was the correct thing to do in the long term, but at the time, it seemed like the only option. Maybe there were other ways to deal with it, but it was all I could think of, so I did what I believed was right. It was difficult for me, and for years I debated whether I should file for custody or have kids taken away from her and rehomed, but there's no telling what might have occurred, and I figured it was better for kids to stay with their mother and maintain touch with me and my parents than risk anything in this circumstance. I hope this answers the questions most people had for me. Maybe I came across as the evil guy for what I did, but I don't care. I know the kids are doing well in their life, and I did everything I could to keep them happy and safe. I was always there for them, therefore I don't feel guilty about anything. Update 2. It's been a week since Diana's message and I've received a lot of phone calls today from family and people who have spoken with her. They were pointing out my mistakes and scolding me. It was getting really tiresome and I was swamped with work, which is why I hadn't been able to post sooner. But today, I decided I'd had enough. After a brief talk with my nephew and nieces, I decided to finally make a post that shared my side of the story as well as, in some ways, theirs. I don't think anyone in the family realized how much those kids had been through as children. How many taunts they had to endure every day simply because Diana opted to become pregnant early and drop everything for her boyfriend at the time. Even after that, she continued to blame others for her own actions and attempted to appear as if she was doing everything in her ability to do the best for her children. But, in actuality, she was never present for them. Since she was telling everyone that I had stolen her children from her and was now stealing a fortune from her, now that her children were doing well financially, I felt people deserved to know the truth, not just her twisted version of events in which she was the victim rather than the person who tormented everyone. They had already judged me for a variety of reasons since they only knew her side of the story and sympathized with her. But in reality, I deserved to share my side of the story, as did her children. So I typed everything up a few hours ago and published the post. So far, she hasn't said anything to me, and the only texts I've gotten are from relatives who were judging me earlier. They have now abruptly changed their tune and are attempting to apologize for judging me too soon. But frankly, it means nothing to me. I simply wanted them to know the truth. I don't care what they think of me, but it was vital for me to speak the truth and share how Diana handled her children, which is why they are no longer in contact with her. Anyway, now that everything is finished, I am ready to move on from this. Honestly, I don't want anything to do with Diana anymore, and I was perfectly content for the past 6 years when she didn't contact me. I believe the same may be stated for her children as well. I don't understand why she felt the need to create so much drama. If she wanted money, she might have asked for it rather than pretending to want another chance at motherhood. Update 3. It's been a day since I wrote that post. Diana may have woken up today and decided to get back at me. Instead of contacting me directly, she became increasingly dramatic and began commenting on that post, attempting to make it appear as if I was lying. But it was not going to work. Obviously, as soon as she attempted to react, her children began commenting and responding to her, reminding her of particular episodes from their childhood in which she had been cruel to them. That lasted about an hour, and I didn't feel awful about it. Nobody else did, because my nephew, nieces and I were all thoroughly enjoying the process. They were utterly humiliating her, and there was no way she could get out of it since every single lie she tried to say to make me look bad was discovered. I'm glad I chose to do this on the weekend. Otherwise, we might not have been able to respond as swiftly. Anyway, that lasted about an hour, and then she began deleting her comments so that no one could catch her in her falsehoods. However, It was too late because many others had already noticed what was going on in the comment section, and I believe she began to be called out for her actions by others. She started erasing her comments and backtracking on everything she said, and then she blocked me. She also blocked her children. I'm guessing it was her way of surrendering, and I'm pleased she did because she would have lost in a fight with us. We clearly have the upper hand here, morally or otherwise. I believed deleting the comments would be the end of our connection, but she chose to contact me personally as well. She messaged me, saying she hoped I was happy now that I had presented her as the monster and everyone hated her. It was very ironic coming from her, because that was exactly what she was attempting to do to me first. She initiated it, and now when I wanted to return it to her, she is unable to accept it. I don't understand why individuals attempt to dish it out when they know they can't take it in return. Just don't cause any drama if you don't want to be held accountable for the results. Anyway, I disregarded that message, and that's what we're all going to do for the rest of our lives because she's no longer worth our attention. She has proven it.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.